An idiom is a figure of speech that uses a group of words that has a meaning that you may not deduce from each individual word. For instance, the conclusion, it's up in the air. He is getting cold feet, or she deserves a seat at the table. And today's guest is named Cicely Simpson. And in her wonderful new book called Up Your C.H.A.I.R, or chair, she was inspired by Shirley Chisholm, a former New York congresswoman who once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And if you find yourself in that situation, Cicely poses some very big questions for you. And one of them, are you ready to take a seat at that table? Because what she means is, are you ready to be part of a conversation, and that you have as much say as anyone else, and you have deserved and or earned a seat, but you may not know what to say when you get there. Our guest today is going to help you with that. And what she says, right, pull up a chair, get ready to learn and apply 5 applicable action strategies that can drastically and radically take your self-leadership skills and ability to lead others to the next level. And CHAIR, C-H-I-R, is an acronym for champion, honesty, adaptability, impact, and regrets. And it's really interesting how through that seat, sometimes we bring our regrets with us, which are nothing more than learning opportunities to determine how to improve our seat. So Cicely Simpson, author, brand new author for Pull Up That Chair, speaker, coach, and just a wonderful human being. It is a pleasure. And welcome to A Climb to the Top.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. Well, tell us, I think before, I certainly want to talk about the book because there is a compelling narrative built into the book and a very easy and accessible model by which people can develop both a mindset and a skill set. But before we get to that, Cicely, just give us your background. Where'd you come from and how did you get to where you are?
Sure. Yeah, I'm from rural Tennessee. So beginning my career in Washington over 20 years ago was the real sort of my first chance to take my seat at the table, having gone to law school before that and practiced law briefly before moving into politics in Washington. And I've spent the last 25 years at the table in both politics and in business. So I start out from a very, rural area that most people in Tennessee have not even heard of, let alone people outside of Tennessee, and have managed to really apply these strategies to work my way up through law school and through a legal career, through a political career, and now a business career as well. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell my story, and thank you for asking.
And yet, while the expression of went to law school and became a lawyer for a short time was your expectation to be a practicing attorney.
Absolutely. I went to school to be a prosecutor, and I got a job in LA County. I got an offer to be an assistant DA straight out of law school. But you know what? I realized Southern California is a very expensive place to live. And back in the early 2000s, assistant district attorneys did not make but about $22,000. So pretty tough to live in Southern California on that salary. So I came back to Nashville and still practiced law here before going to DC.
Yet you had mentioned very early on in the book, and before we get to the details of the book, you never expected to be into politics, government. How did that transition occur?
Sure. So when I moved back to Nashville, after leaving law school in California, I mean, Chuck, you know how it goes. You run into people you haven't seen in a while, because I am actually, from Tennessee and went to college here. I ran into some old friends who were running a congressional campaign for a state senator who was running for Congress, and we reconnected, old times. How are you? How are you? And in the midst of the conversation, the person said to me, I'd love to get you involved in our campaign. And I said, well, what would I do? And they said, I don't know, maybe just, help the candidate just with some research and talking point, just stuff that you probably got used to in law school. And I said, sure, yeah, I can do that. It'd be good to meet some people and get, reintegrated back into, things happening in Tennessee. So I joined the campaign on a part-time basis, helping out really with anything the candidate needed. And the funny thing about that, Chuck, is that was election night 2002, November 2002. And literally he won. He was the only Democrat who won a Republican open seat that year, and he won it by less than a point. And
well,
he looked
credit Cicely for being a part of that campaign.
Timing is everything, but he looked at
you
me.
You picked a winner.
I did. And he said to me that night, do you want to go to Washington? And I was like, why would I ever want to go to Washington? And he said, well, have you ever been? And I said, no, you know where I'm from, small town Tennessee. No, I've never been to Washington. He said, well, come with me. And I said, well, what would I do? And he said, I don't know. We just won. I'm just figuring this out, but I wanted to be part of my team. And I said, I don't know. And he said, try it for 6 months. If you don't like it, you can come back home. And that was in 2002. And I've been in DC ever since.
Was either he suggesting or your mind, what do I do with my law practice?
You know, actually, I thought the 6 month, yeah, sure, I'll go to DC. I'll try it. It'll be fun. And then I'll come back and practice law, continuing practice law. Right. So again, it just didn't hit me that politics would be something that I would spend my career. And I thought, sure, I'll check this box. It'll be fun for a few months. I'll come back to Nashville, reconnect with the folks at my firm and, continuing practicing law. So no, it never occurred to me. This would be a door opening that would lead to many more doors opening in my career, but it just wasn't my mindset at the time.
Did you stop practicing law?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. Once I got to Washington, and look, everybody knows it, but I was 24, 25 at that time. Once you get the political bug and you're really in the middle of everything happening in the country and you're in the Capitol every day and you just get the political bug. And so once I was there, I thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever been a part of. And I sort of left my legal leanings behind, but then I picked them back up later on in my career. And we can talk about how I've now sort of incorporated my legal training back into my representation of businesses in Washington.
I definitely wanted to go there because I think it's got to be interesting what it is you learned as a prosecutor. But before we get to there, this job that you were now moving into, what was it?
It was to be a legislative director for Congressman Lincoln Davis, which is the number 2 spot in a congressional office. So the job really is again, no legislative experience, no political experiences of working on the campaign, but I was in charge of leading and establishing his legislative agenda since he was a freshman member of Congress. So basically, all the legislation that went through the House of Representatives or the Senate, I was responsible for briefing him, making sure he knew what he was voting on, my recommendations for how he should vote, and basically managing all pieces of legislation that Congress would be looking at during my tenure in his office. So I stepped into some pretty big job. And thankfully there was a guy down the hall, Chuck, who's still a good friend of mine to this day. And he said to me, you have no idea what you're doing, do you? I said, I actually don't. And he said, let's go grab a cup of coffee and I'll tell you how to be a legislative director. And he's been a good friend ever since.
Well, that is so cool. But although one could argue you're out of your comfort zone, I have to believe 3 years of law school, time as a prosecuting attorney, you are practicing law, you are enforcing law, you are legal jurisprudence every minute of your day. To be able now to help a congressperson to synthesize, distill the legislative agenda, I'd imagine there must have been some intuition on that.
Of course, yeah. The legal training and obviously what we're taught in law school is absolutely to take cases and, complicated set of facts and distill them very quickly.
Right.
Bite-sized pieces that the jury or anyone else can understand. So yes, that training served me very well, believe it or not.
Right. But here you are now, no longer prosecuting or defending. You are not in a courtroom any longer. You're not even preparing for a case or an argument. You're now in the service of an individual who needs your help. Let's cross the bridge from legal skills to now this position. How did it cross over?
They're really, certainly you learn leadership skills and skills in law school that translate. But honestly, being in Washington, being in a congressional office, leading a staff, that was all very new to me. That was the first time I'd led a team. It was the first time that, I had managerial responsibilities, but also had such a big portfolio of responsibilities. And really, I think that experience, while law school was instrumental, really working on the Hill, Chuck, really it started to form my leadership style, inform the way I chose to conduct that leadership style every day in terms of how I manage my team. But it also taught me how to show up. What do you do when you're in those meetings, negotiating legislation with other members of Congress or their staff? How do you show up for yourself? How do you start to really take on an identity as a leader, certainly in that sphere, but obviously others see you that way as well.
Right. And we now bring politics into this day and age. What we see is very binary. What we seem, and I don't know if we've lost the art of compromise, but we seem to be in a world that needs more middle ground compromise. I would imagine that must have been a challenge for you to try to figure out, while you take sides, being open-minded to the other points of view. Was that fun, opportunistic? What did that feel like?
All of the above. And
right.
part of my training as a prosecutor is to anticipate the other side's arguments and be able to defeat those because you've anticipated those. So yeah, you're right. In DC, now listen, this was 20 years ago. So it was a very different place than what it is now. There actually was compromise. We worked with both sides of the aisle. I worked for two Southern Democrats. We call them Blue Dog Democrats, Lincoln Davis and Jim Cooper. Jim Cooper, who's still now in office, represents Nashville. And they were that middle. The Blue Dogs were the moderate Democrats that everybody wanted to work with. So I immediately stepped in, Chuck, to a role where I worked with the Bush administration. It was very common for us to work with the Bush administration on commonalities and issues of interest. And so really being able now to work with Republicans, work with Democrats, House, Senate, and to be able to anticipate arguments, know what's coming, to be able to be prepared to address those, but also to find that common ground. We don't do that anymore. In DC, it's all about the polar opposites, and the middle continues to diminish and shrink. But in those days, and I've sort of seen the evolution of this change, indeed, it was a meeting of the minds, and we all got in a room and we figured it out. And that is where I think the skills of negotiation and legislating came from my experience in law school.
Well, I often think about, when I read the news or I watch it, I think about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those principles was seek first to understand, pause for dramatic effect, and then to be understood. And yet sometimes for those of us not involved in politics, many of my friends and I wax on and we begin to wonder, is anyone listening to each other? Are they seeking first to understand and then to be understood? It just seems much more of a battleground. Is that how it has evolved?
That's how it has evolved. But listen, you bring up a great point. Even clients that I coach right now who are different stages of their career, the one thing I tell them is the 3 best words that will be your best friend in your career is help me understand.
Right.
Help me understand will diffuse confrontation. Help
Indeed.
me understand and does seek for you to understand and be understood. Those are 3 very powerful words that are very much underutilized in our vocabulary and in our careers. But yes, it has evolved to the point where there's not a lot of listening to each other. There's not a lot of seeking to understand nor be understood.
Right.
And that evolution, and in some ways diminished evolution, is why we find ourselves in such a binary, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. And just this sort of, we're always in battle. And I'm hoping that we find ourselves in a moment right now with the Ukraine situation where we're finding common ground and we're finding that common purpose again. And I'm hoping that lasts for a little while, not just the crisis of the moment.
Yeah, we certainly, what we see outside of the realm of politics is what often feels like a zero-sum game, and that there's winners and losers, not in between. So we thank you for your service and for the enthusiasm of trying to find the middle ground, which leads us to your book. And before I get to that, though, let's draw some conclusions that led you to wanting to put your work into the universe via a book. You made a transition from a lawyer to being on a legislative team, where you are now doing something you probably never planned or trained for. You're leading people. You are seeking to inspire, to persuade, to provoke. All of those things are on display, yet they don't necessarily teach that in college and law school. What were you learning in that frame of inspire, persuade, and provoke that led you to become a leadership coach?
Well, and that journey did start on Capitol Hill because, and one thing I learned, and I'm continuing to learn, Chuck, throughout both my congressional career, but also now translating over into the corporate America, which is where I went when I left Capitol Hill, very much meeting people where they are, that persuasion, listening, that provoking. Everyone comes at things with their own biases and their own points of view. How you meet people where they are, how you as a leader can convince someone to get behind a vision or an idea or a project. That took years for me to learn, simply because you're right, I didn't have any formal training. And I find now, even 20 years later, so many people, Chuck, that I coach and that are buying the book haven't had that formal training either. We all were just sort of put in these spots and said, okay, go do your job. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. Wait, is that it? That's it? That's all you're going to give me?
Job description I'm not doing what the job description said. In fact, I don't know what I'm doing. I know what it said. That's right. Where you were.
Well, and that's what happened with me at Dunkin' Brands. So when I left Capitol Hill and went to work for Dunkin' Brands, the corporate parent of Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin-Robbins restaurants in 2008, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. I had been there for 4 months when the financial crisis started. And of course, there's no on-the-job training for, the economy being in crisis. But you're right. Over the course of the 7.5 years that I worked for Dunkin', Chuck, I started out with one job and I was hired to do one thing. And then my job expanded to 4 things. And so now I was not only responsible for representing the company before Congress and the White House, but now it was governors. It was city councils. It was international governments where restaurants were being built, because at that time, the restaurants were in 68 different countries. Right. So I started out with one job description and very quickly found myself with 4 different job descriptions, but I took advantage of that opportunity. And that is where these leadership strategies for this book really started to form. How do I advocate for myself that I was hired to do one thing and I ended up doing 4? How do I put myself forward as a thought leader, someone who clearly is bringing value to the table? I want my seat at that table. Now let's talk about how we get it. I'm demonstrating value every day. Let's translate that into a real conversation of me being part of the leadership team. Even though I didn't have the title, I was doing the work. And so that's when I really started advocating for myself and really understanding the power of how you show up for yourself. And when you take your seat at the table, what you do when you get there. That Dunkin' experience really started to inform and form what I'm currently doing now as a coach and as an author.
Well, then you are independent on your own and no longer part of Dunkin' brand. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm now the founder and CEO of my own lobbying and communications firm. Okay. And I'm practicing into these strategies in practice every day, because now I've got to prove my clients the value I offer to them, representing them in Washington. So still living it and breathing it every day.
Well, let's get into then Pull Up Your C.H.A.I.R. As an author myself, and I want to give a plug to our publisher, Advantage Media, who has been excellent to me and to you as well, as I understand, a great experience. So a shout out to Advantage Media. Thank you for all you've done for me as well. This is a great opportunity to bring 2 of your authors together, and what a wonderful opportunity this is. Throughout the course of your coaching practice, this chair thing came to you, whether it was Shirley Chisholm's inspiration or otherwise. Before we even get into the book, help us to understand the origin of CHAIR as a metaphor, but also the acronym, and what was in your mind before you sat down to write this.
Sure. So over many years, whether I was on Capitol Hill or working for Dunkin' or even working representing the restaurant industry at the industry level, Chuck, I've always been asked to give speeches of my career. How did you advance? What did you do? How have you held these roles, especially being a woman of color and often a young woman for some of these roles? People would often tell me, you're a lot younger than the last person who was in this role. So I took all that information, and actually it was March 12th, 2020, the day before the world shut down. And I was giving a speech to a bunch of CEOs, and it was this question: how have you done what you've been able to do? And I've been inspired by Shirley Chisholm's career for a long time. And I said, you know what? Here's how I would sum up my career. And I gave that quote: no one gave me a seat at the table. I brought my own chair and made my own every single job I've had, and I've been wildly successful at it. Now, I've had a lot of tried and true errors and mistakes, but I've made triumph over challenge. And they heard that. A couple of people heard that speech and they heard that quote and they were like, that's a powerful quote. And they came to me afterwards and said, do you coach? And I'm like, no, yeah.
I do now.
I've mentored people for 25 years. I don't call that coaching. They're like, well, no, that's coaching. Do you coach? And a series of conversations took place thereafter where I already had this chair model in my head that I wanted to share these strategies with people. But those affirmations of, will you help me in my career, really told me this is a powerful message that others need to hear. I discovered it on my own and I've, made my own way. But now that I understand the value of that, how can I not share that with somebody else who's seeking the same path and the same advice?
I love that. That's how you came to it. But what was interesting in the frame of your book, you used CHAIR as an acronym for some pretty important attributes. Can you explain CHAIR? And I really want to underscore the R because I wasn't expecting that when I read the book. The first four made perfect sense. And if you looked up on LinkedIn, what do they ask for in the top 5 soft skills? Adaptability, creativity, all those things. Champion yourself, but not that. So let's get to CHAIR. Tell us, our listeners, what that stands for, what that means to you, and let's finish up with the R.
Sure. I'll very quickly run through those.
Yeah.
The C, champion yourself. Now, people usually think the C is for confidence, and I actually think confidence is not enough. Confidence is where you start. But you can be confident and never open your mouth to actually champion yourself and advocate for yourself. So this champion yourself is the idea of you are actively creating the conversation about what you bring to the table, your value proposition. So it's more than confidence. It's actually the act of self-advocacy and self-leadership.
Great.
The A is for honesty, because anyone who's been in their career long enough has gotten some tough feedback about blind spots they may have. Perhaps they don't understand how they're being perceived, what I call how you land on people. You have to have moments of honest self-reflection and self-honesty to understand where can you be better, how can you improve. None of us are going to be perfect, but the progress that we seek and understanding the self-reflection is a very key piece of self-leadership. You can't lead yourself. You can't lead others until you lead yourself. The A is for adaptability. And I tell people this is the one soft skill I call core competency that no one teaches you, but you're judged on every single day. Because look at what's happening around you. And if you're not adaptable, then very much that undermines your credibility. Yeah. The I is for impact. Again, people think that's imposter syndrome. I don't believe in imposter syndrome, because when you've done the work, you're not an imposter. You belong at that table in the seat that you're in. So impact is, if you champion yourself to get to the table, impact keeps you there. Impact every single day, bringing impact, how you add impact, how you bring that and show up. That's really the secret sauce that's going to keep you at that table for a very long time to come. The R, being regrets, is the one that, you're right, surprises a lot of people, simply because people who come to me for coaching, people that I've talked to since I've started this coaching program, it comes out in conversation. Now, before I started the coaching program, the reason why R was so important to me is because that is the mantra within which I live my life. I have no regrets. It's why I've been able to pursue and make changes from law to politics, politics to business, and now business to being a CEO. My question to myself, Chuck, is, am I going to regret it? If the answer is yes, then that makes a decision for me. I'm going to pursue whatever opportunity it is, not knowing where it may lead, but knowing that if I don't take the chance, then I'm going to regret it. To your point, we bring our regrets with us. The opportunities we miss, right? 100% of the shots, you miss is because you didn't take them. Right. And I find that regrets can be a very powerful motivator for missed opportunities that now galvanize you and motivate you to act, not to miss those opportunities again. So ending with the regrets piece is a nice bookend to the self-advocacy of championing yourself, because we often look back and have so many regrets of when we didn't champion ourselves.
Yeah, and I really liked, as I was reading it, and I looked at the primacy effect in the C of the champion, and I looked at the recency effect in the R. At first, when I looked at the acronym, I thought, oh, maybe it's risk. I didn't know what it was. I was so open-minded to see what you were articulating. And when I read the regrets, I said, wow, this is cool. Most people don't do that. When they're writing about their books, they're talking about all the positivity. But I think this is experience is a name we give to our mistakes, but our mistakes are only valuable in the self-honesty and the reflection of how to avoid them, because none of us, and I think where we all come from, we're not afraid to make the mistakes. We're afraid of not learning from them. And what I loved about your book was the reinforcement that if you don't learn from them, you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. That's what I got out of it. Is that what you were going for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is that recognition that you have a choice to make. You can choose to live in regret, or you can do something about it. And so, yes, you captured that very well. I'm glad that came across so as my, what I was trying to convey to all the readers who hit regrets can be crippling for those who choose not to learn from those mistakes. And it's one of the reasons why, as we talk about championing yourselves, a very powerful component of that is lessons learned. What are the lessons how do you bring those forward? Yeah.
We had on our show several months ago, it was a gentleman named Avram L. McKees, and he is the CEO of a company called CLMBR Climber. In fact, there's a machine right behind me. And he founded, after founding a dog food, a pet food company, he founded this chair. But it was interesting how he spoke. Like with you, he had an interesting twist and turn evolution. But he talked about, he worked in a nursing home when he was in college. And people were unfortunately in the last stretches of their lives. And it was sad, but it was an interesting lesson. And I wonder your take on this. He talked about people had two regrets. One, I didn't help more people. And two, I didn't take more risks. And I was reading your book. It was interesting. The regret to me was tied to the decision or indecision when opportunity intersects with preparation in some form, the indecision of regretting not taking an action. Your book felt very much, if ever there is a choice between action and inaction, what do you have to lose? Otherwise, you would regret that inaction.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a quick story to sort of illustrate that. The regrets mantra started for me. I was in law school. What many people don't know about me is I have a debilitating chronic disease called sickle cell anemia. It has been with me since I was born. But Chuck, when I got to law school, the very first, listen, this is my dream. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 8 years old, right? I was going to be the first African-American female Supreme Court justice. Well, guess what? President Biden chose somebody else, but that's okay.
Okay, well, you still might have your shot. The next one.
3 months into my law school career, and I start having debilitating chest pains, debilitating drop to my knees. I can't breathe kind of chest pains. I didn't know what was going on. And I went to the doctor and he said to me, you know what this is? Your body can't handle the stress. You're not like everybody else, Cicely. You can't go to law school and do what everybody else does. Right. And he said to me, you have a choice. It's your health or law school. And I looked at my parents and I said, if I don't do this now, I will regret it for the rest of my life. And my mom and dad said, then you need to go ahead. Right. And we can deal with the fallout of that. That is the decision or indecision. Think of how my life would have changed had I chosen the other path when that moment presented itself. Think of what may or may not be right now. That indecision is consequential in so many ways.
Well, you may have another book here, because I think what many of us do and what we do for a living is we ourselves and we help others to challenge and sometimes defy the conventional wisdom. Because if you had fallen prey to that wisdom, your life would be in a different place. So no regrets. So you're living by example and leading by example. To our listeners, then, where do they find you and the book?
Sure. The book is available. It is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you want to download a free chapter, go to my website, CicelySimpson.com. There's a free chapter of the book you can download there before you buy it. But they can find me on my website, or I'm on all social channels, have a YouTube channel, Chuck, with tons of career tips and strategies. I go live every Monday and Thursday offering free strategies. Hey, come join me. We're talking about communication, or we're talking about action or fear or failure. So I provide a lot of resources for folks on my YouTube channel, but also they can find me across all social channels and my website as well.
Fantastic. And to all the listeners, if ever you are considering finding a seat at the table, bringing a chair for the seat at the table, but what do you do when you get to the table? Cicely is here to help. Her book, Pull Up Your Chair, was a wonderful read. It is actionable. It was accessible, very easy to understand. And sometimes the hardest things that we do are the simplest things. And if we just develop the mindset of keeping it simple, and then our decision model every single day, leading us to champion, to be honest, to be adaptable, to have impact, but mostly to ensure that we never regret the actions that we're taking, Cicely Simpson's book is for you. So, Cicely, thank you very much for coming on to A Climb to the Top. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for a great conversation.
You're welcome. And to our listeners, thank you always for tuning in. This is Chuck Garcia. We are grateful for the opportunity to be able to bring these wonderful guests to you. We thank you for all of your comments. Take care.